and welcome to UATV Weekly. This week, Ukraine struck Russia's Black Sea Fleet, hit targets deep inside in Siberia, and pushed Russian forces back on the ground. We'll also look at Russia's fuel crisis, Putin new threats, tensions with Japan and China, and Ukraine's growing race for new air defense technologies. And finally, how Ukrainian rescuers help fight wildfires in France. I'm Yulia Horva. Let's get started. Russia Black Sea port on Novorossiysk came under one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks on the city since the beginning of the full-scale war against Ukraine. The attack took place overnight on August 12th. Russian authorities said that hundreds of drones were involved in the attack across the Krasnodar region. In Novorossiysk, fires were reported at several strategic locations, including an oil terminal and the military harbor where Russia's Black Sea Fleet is based. Local monitoring channels reported explosions and fires in the port area, while satellite data from NASA's firm's system also showed thermal anomalies at the reported locations. The attack also hit grain infrastructure. Reuters reported that a major grain terminal in Novorossiysk stopped operations after being damaged. Ukraine has not officially detailed all the targets involved in the operation, but the scale and location of the attack show how far Ukrainian strikes are now reaching, hitting Russia's key naval and export hub on the Black Sea, hundreds of kilometers from the front line. During the attack on Novorossiysk, Ukraine launched a large-scale combined strike on the Russian Black Sea Fleet naval base. According to the General Staff of Ukraine, 4 Russian warships were damaged. The frigates Admiral Makarov and Admiral Essen, both capable of carrying Caliber cruise missiles, as well as the missile corvette Buyan M and the patrol ship Vasil Bykov. President Volodymyr Zelensky later confirmed the damage and said that other Russian naval vessels had also been hit. The scale and combination of weapons used played a special role in the operation. Ukraine used a combination of long-range missiles, strike drones, and unmanned boats, striking the Russian fleet from the air and sea in a coordinated operation. Ukraine's acting defense minister Yevhen Samara called it a successful combined deep strike that demonstrated Ukraine's growing ability to strike Russian naval forces even within their own base.
Russia proved powerless against the synchronized use of Ukrainian strike capabilities. This is the result of joint efforts and the growing synergy among Ukraine's defense forces. We will shut down Russia's war machine, destroying its infrastructure, fleet, logistics, fuel and energy facilities, and companies working to support the war against Ukraine. Yevhen Samara, acting Minister of Defense of Ukraine, in Telegram.
And Russia's war machine continued to come under attack this week. After the strikes on Russia's Black Sea Fleet and logistics infrastructure, Ukraine hit another major target, this time about 900 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Overnight on August 15th, Ukrainian forces struck the Progress Rocket and Space Center in Samara. President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that the facility was hit by Ukrainian-made Flamingo missiles. The strike was also confirmed by Ukraine's general staff. A fire broke out at the facility, while the full extent of the damage is still being assessed. And this was no ordinary factory. Progress is the only facility in Russia responsible for serial assembly of the Soyuz-2 family of launch vehicles. The company is part of the Roscosmos and also produces spacecraft used for Earth observation and intelligence purposes. In other words, Ukraine struck a facility at the intersection of Russia's military, space and intelligence capabilities using its own long-range Flamingo missiles. Ukraine has introduced another innovative way to strike Russian air defense targets, using a naval drone as a carrier for FPV drones. In early August, Ukraine's military intelligence unit Group 13 conducted an operation in temporarily occupied Crimea. The unit used Magura multi-purpose naval drones with FPV drones to attack important Russian targets. The naval drone approached the coast of the temporarily occupied peninsula and launched FPV drones from the water. The small drones then attacked their targets. The operation resulted in the destruction of two Russian S-400 missile launchers and an Orion antenna used to control the Russian drones. Ukraine's military intelligence claims that the losses of the Russian forces from the operation could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. This is another example of how Ukraine is combining relatively inexpensive unmanned systems to destroy some of Russia's most expensive weapons. And it's not only Ukraine's battlefield operations that are becoming more innovative. Ukrainian engineers are also developing new technologies to counter Russia's evolving air threats. As Russia increasingly replaces conventional Shahed drones with faster jet-powered versions, Ukraine is already testing a new generation of interceptors. Former Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov says the first Ukrainian jet-powered interceptor drones are now undergoing combat testing. Ukrainian team has developed an interceptor capable of reaching more than 600 kilometers per hour, thanks to its jet engine. The goal is simple: to catch Russia's new jet-powered Shaheds before they can reach their targets.
Today, we are seeing a clear trend. The Russians are gradually replacing conventional Shaheds with jet-powered ones. This is a shift in the strategy of the war in the air. Our response must be swift if we are to keep defeating Russia in every technological cycle. Mikhailo Fedorov, former defense minister of Ukraine, in Telegram.
Ukraine also made gains on the ground this week. Ukrainian forces liberated 19 settlements on the Alexandrivka front, as at the junction of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and the Zaporizhia regions. According to the OSINT project Deep State, Russian forces were also pushed back near 6 more settlements. The changes were recorded after Ukrainian forces conducted a series of offensive operations in the area. These events are part of a larger Ukrainian operation in the Alexandrivka direction. This week, Ukraine also began a new season of strikes on Russian oil and energy infrastructure, with a record target. Ukrainian forces struck an oil, gas, and petrochemical facility in Tobolsk, Siberia, more than 2,500 kilometers from Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the strike and called it another major achievement of Ukraine's long-range capabilities. He said Siberia was now within reach of Ukrainian deep strikes. The target was the Zapsibneftechim complex, one of Russia's largest petrochemical facilities. According to Reuters, the plant was forced to shut down after the attack by Ukrainian drones. The facility produces about 6 million tons of liquefied petroleum gas per year. It's about 40% of Russia's total LPG production. So the message from Ukraine is becoming increasingly clear. Russia's strategic rear is shrinking, and its oil, gas, and energy infrastructure is no longer secure, even deep in Siberia.
Буде більше українських діпстрайків, які
There will be more Ukrainian deep strikes aimed at demonstrating to Russia and the Russian people that peace is necessary. We have data from internal polls in Russia showing that the number of people who want the war to end is already growing. This needs to become even more evident so that Putin and his administration, his security forces, and everyone else in the aggressor state understand equally clearly that there is no alternative to peace.
And perhaps the clearest sign that Russia is beginning to feel the consequences of this war against Ukraine is appearing not on the battlefield but as gas stations. Zelensky said this is no alternative for Russia except peace. This week, ordinary Russians were getting another reminder of why. A new wave of the fuel crisis is spreading across Russia. Gasoline prices are rising, fuel shortages are being reported in multiple regions, and long queues have returned to gas stations. Some regions have even brought back restrictions on how much fuel drivers can buy. The reason is becoming increasingly difficult for the Kremlin to hide. Ukrainian strikes have disrupted Russian oil refineries, cutting into the country's ability to produce gasoline and diesel. Reuters reports that fuel prices have already jumped by 16 to 18%, while shortages are pushing up transportation costs and adding pressure to inflation. And when there is not enough gasoline, the queues become a battlefield of their own. Videos from Russian gas stations show drivers waiting for hours and, in some places, fighting each other over access to fuel. And Russia's new fuel crisis have come at a particularly inconvenient time, just 2 weeks before the country's so-called parliamentary elections. But instead of addressing the country's problems at home, the Kremlin, driven by fear, appears to be resorting to manipulation. Russia's only registered anti-war political party, Yabloko, has been banned from the upcoming State Duma so-called elections. What makes this story particularly telling is that Yabloko was initially approved by Russia's Central Election Commission. The party even got a spot on the ballots, but on August 10th, the Supreme Court revoked its registration after a lawsuit filed by the pro-Kremlin Rodina party. The official charges included alleged campaign and copyright violations, including the use of photos and other materials in the party's campaign. The court upheld several of the claims and cancelled Yabloko's federal list. This court decision caused a wave of protests among young people in the Moscow and St. Petersburg. However, the protests didn't last long. As soon as the police approached the protesters, they immediately disappeared. Let us recall that Yabloko openly campaigns for peace, ceasefire, and diplomacy in Ukraine. It was the only registered party that took an openly anti-war position and was allowed on the federal ballot. It is difficult to miss the moment. As Russia's face rising fuel prices, shortages, and growing economic pressure, the only political force that offers voters a legitimate way to say enough this war has been removed from the ballot. Russia is preparing for so-called elections, but apparently only those to which it is impossible to give a wrong answer. Having failed on the Western Front and facing growing problems in Russia's heartland, dictator Putin moved east. He visited the headquarters of Russia's Pacific Fleet of Sakhalin. Donning a sailor's uniform, the dictator read from a note a new series of threats against the West.
We see that the authorities of some countries violating international maritime law are trying to restrict the movement of our ships, peaceful ships. And recently they have thought of the possibility of seizing our ships and selling our property. We perceive this as piracy. And if this begins to be implemented in practice, we will be forced to respond in kind. And not necessarily in those water areas where the seizure of our ships is planned, but where we ourselves consider it appropriate.
And here is an interesting question. How exactly does Putin plan to seize Western ships of his own fleet is hiding under anti-drone nets? Ahead of Putin's visit, Russia's Pacific Fleet has installed large anti-drone nets over its ships and submarines at bases in the Pacific Ocean. It's 7,500 kilometers from Ukraine. Satellite images have shown the measure being used to protect some of Russia's most valuable naval assets from potential drone attacks. So while Putin threatens to seize Western ships anywhere, his own fleet is busy protecting itself from drones. What do you think about Putin's threats? Can they be implemented? Write your opinion under this video. Putin's eastern trip had another consequence. He visited Iltrap Island, one of the 4 southern Kuril islands, which are claimed by both Russia and Japan. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi called the visit absolutely unacceptable and said it would further worsen relations with Russia. Japan continues to consider the islands its territory.
Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Japan-Russia relationship has been in a difficult state. Even under such circumstances, Japan has made every possible effort to improve the relationship. However, This visit will only deepen negative sentiment towards Russia and Japan and make it harder to rebuild relations for the long term. Sanai Takaichi, Prime Minister of Japan.
Putin may have another reason for provoking Japan, and it has little to do with the Coral Islands themselves. By visiting Itarap, a disputed island claimed by Japan, Putin is sending a message to Tokyo at a time when tensions between Japan and China are also rising. Japan has made it clear that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could directly affect Japan's security. Tokyo has taken a tougher stance on the possibility of a Taiwan conflict, while Beijing has strongly opposed Japan's position. And Russia has every reason to please Beijing. Moscow is increasingly dependent on Russia economically and politically, while Beijing has recently been publicly calling on Russia and Ukraine to show political will and return to negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. So Putin's visit to Itarap can be seen as more than just another display of Russian claims over the Kurils. It is also a convenient signal to Japan and a way for Moscow to demonstrate solidarity with its most important partner in Asia. But against the backdrop of China's calls to end the war against Ukraine, Russia is rejecting a freeze on the current frontline. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow would not agree to simply freeze the conflict.
If we were to suddenly stop at the line of contact now, we would, in essence, allow to cross out the feet of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers who defeated Nazism. This cannot be considered.
While Russia refuses to stop the war against Ukraine, Ukraine faces another urgent challenge: protecting civilians from Russian ballistic missiles. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine urgently needs more interceptors for its Patriot air defense systems. According to Zelensky, only 5% of the current US stockpile of Patriot missiles would be enough for Ukraine to get through the winter and save lives.
So this year we have 2.5 times less interceptors than we had in 2025. First, Russia has 2 times more ballistic missiles per month than they had before. We pay 100% to Americans. I have the package from the United States, and then my personal involvement. It doesn't work other way. It's my personal talks, meetings, and phone calls each day with everybody. I try to exchange something to missiles. This year, I'm asking American partners to sell me 5% of missiles, what they have in their stocks. If they sell us 5%, we will go through the winter and save people's lives. If they can sell us 10%, we will destroy all the Russians' ballistic missiles.
And finally, a story that shows that despite the war, Ukraine is still trying to help its partners. Ukrainian rescuers spent nearly 2 weeks in France helping local emergency services fight major wildfires. The Ukrainian team included 70 rescuers and 15 pieces of specialized equipment. It was Ukraine's first such mission to an EU country under the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. In one operation, Ukrainian rescuers helped contain a forest fire that threatened to spread towards a nearby settlement. Working alongside their French colleagues, they stopped the fire from advancing. Ukraine is fighting a war at home and rescuing people from Russian attacks every day. Yet it still finds the strength to help those who stand with Ukraine. That's all for this week. Thank you for watching. If you found this update useful, like this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss next week's Ukraine Weekly.